At my husband's memorial, my daughter-in-law leaned toward guests and whispered, "She'll be gone by tomorrow. This house belongs to us now." I lowered my head, but when the lawyer handed me a second sealed envelope, I opened it and gasped, because inside was, "Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories." My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing at my husband Robert's memorial service, listening to such cruel words slice through the air like a blade through silk. The funeral home's ceiling fans hummed overhead, circulating the heavy scent of lilies and roses, while Jennifer's whispered promise of my eviction spread through the room like poison. My black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 15 years ago, suddenly felt suffocating as I gripped the mysterious envelope the lawyer had just pressed into my trembling hands. For 45 years, I devoted every fiber of my being to my family. I was 23 when I married Robert, fresh out of nursing school with dreams of changing the world. Instead, I changed diapers, cleaned scraped knees, and held my children through nightmares and heartbreaks. Our house in Westbrook, Connecticut, wasn't just walls and a roof. Every corner held a memory. Every creak in the floorboards told a story of the life we'd built together. I raised 3 children in those rooms. Michael, our eldest, whose serious nature reminded me so much of his father. Then came Patricia, now living in Seattle with her own family, and Timothy, our youngest, who we lost to leukemia when he was just 12. That loss nearly broke us, but we held each other together with love and faith, even when the medical bills threatened to drown us. I worked double shifts at Hartford Hospital's emergency ward, coming home at dawn to pack school lunches and help with homework. My feet would ache so badly I'd soak them in Epsom salt while checking Michael's math assignments at the kitchen table. When Robert started his construction business in our garage with just a hammer and a dream, I was the one who kept the books at night after my hospital shifts. I remember falling asleep over invoices, waking up with calculator imprints on my cheek. During the lean years, when contracts were scarce, I sold my grandmother's pearl necklace, my engagement ring upgrade that Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary, and even my mother's antique china set to keep us afloat. I never told Robert about the jewelry. His pride was worth more to me than any gemstone. These hands, now spotted with age and trembling with grief, had held Robert through 2 heart surgeries. They'd sewn Halloween costumes from scratch because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. They'd planted every rosebush in our garden, painted every room in our house, and written thousands of checks for school field trips, baseball uniforms, and college textbooks. When Michael needed braces, I took overnight shifts. When he wanted to attend Cornell for his business degree, I worked every holiday for 3 years straight. My back, now curved from decades of bending over hospital beds and garden plots, told the story of a woman who never put herself first. Not when I missed my own father's birthday party to attend Michael's soccer championships. Not when I gave up my dream of getting my nurse practitioner degree so we could afford Robert's business expansion. Not even when I discovered a lump in my breast 5 years ago and delayed my mammogram for 2 months because Jennifer had just announced her pregnancy and needed help with baby preparations. But my heart, despite everything, had always been full. Full because I believed that every sacrifice was an investment in love, that family was the greatest treasure anyone could possess, and that the children you pour your life into would be there to hold you when your own strength fails. How foolishly naive that seems now, standing here with Jennifer's words echoing in my ears, wondering what secrets lay hidden in this sealed envelope that might change everything. Before Robert's sudden heart attack 3 weeks ago, our life had settled into the most beautiful rhythm I'd ever known. After 45 years of marriage, we'd finally reached that golden shore that young couples dream about but can't quite imagine. Every morning began the same perfect way. Robert would wake at 6:30 sharp, no alarm needed, and I'd hear him humming Dean Martin songs in the shower. By the time I made it downstairs, he'd have the coffee brewing, that expensive Colombian blend he'd discovered at the farmer's market and insisted we deserved after all these years of drinking generic brands. Our kitchen, with its worn butcher block counters and mismatched chairs we'd collected from estate sales, would fill with the warmth of morning sun streaming through the gingham curtains I'd sewn myself back in 1985. Robert would be at his spot by the window, reading his newspaper with those drugstore reading glasses perched on his nose, occasionally sharing headlines that amused or annoyed him. I'd stand at the stove making his eggs over easy, exactly how he'd liked them for 4 decades, with 2 strips of bacon and wheat toast cut diagonally, because he swore it tasted better that way. Sunday dinners had become the cornerstone of our week. Michael and Jennifer would arrive around 4 o'clock with the twins, 8-year-old boys named Mason and Marcus, who had their grandfather's mischievous eyes and their grandmother's stubborn chin. The house would instantly transform from quiet sanctuary to joyful chaos. The boys would race straight to the backyard where Robert had built them a treehouse last summer. Despite my protests about his heart condition, he'd stand at the sliding door, watching them play with such pride on his face it made my chest tight with love. Jennifer always brought her famous potato salad, the recipe she'd gotten from her mother and guarded like a state secret. She'd kiss my cheek at the door, calling me Mom in that sweet voice, asking if I needed help with anything. Michael would find his father in the den, and they'd discuss business over bourbon, their voices a comfortable rumble that reminded me of distant thunder. I'd cook pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the whole house filling with the scent of rosemary and thyme from my garden. The garden itself was my sanctuary. Robert had tilled it for me 20 years ago, complaining the entire time about his aching back, but smiling when he saw my face light up at the finished beds. Every morning after Robert left for his office, I'd spend an hour among my tomatoes and roses, my hands in the soil, talking to the plants like old friends. The neighbors probably thought I was crazy, this old woman chatting away to her vegetables, but those plants knew all my secrets, all my worries, all my quiet hopes. 3 months ago, life had given us an unexpected gift. Robert sold his construction business to a larger firm for more money than we'd ever dreamed possible. For the first time in our lives, we were genuinely comfortable. Not wealthy by Connecticut standards, but comfortable enough that I stopped checking the bank balance before grocery shopping. Robert had paid off our mortgage with the first check, and I'd cried when he showed me the deed, stamped paid in full in bold letters. We'd started planning our first real vacation in 15 years. Robert had bought travel guides for Italy, spreading them across our bed like treasure maps. He'd circle restaurants in Rome, museums in Florence, vineyards in Tuscany. "Sarah," he'd said one evening, taking my hand across the dinner table, "I want to show you the world while we still can. I want to drink wine with you in an Italian piazza and watch the sunset from the Ponte Vecchio." His eyes had sparkled with the enthusiasm of a much younger man, and I'd fallen in love with him all over again. Saturday mornings meant cinnamon rolls from scratch, a tradition I'd started when the children were young and continued even after they'd all moved out. Robert would pretend to read his paper while actually watching me work the dough, occasionally stealing pinches of the cinnamon sugar mixture. We'd eat them warm from the oven, butter melting into the swirls, not talking about cholesterol or diabetes, just enjoying the sweetness of the moment and each other's company in our peaceful, perfect life. 2 days after Robert passed, while I was still moving through the house like a ghost trapped between worlds, Jennifer arrived unannounced at 9 in the morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through sympathy cards, trying to write thank you notes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The doorbell startled me so badly I knocked over my cold coffee watching it, spread across the white envelopes like a tide of grief. When I opened the door, Jennifer stood there with a casserole dish and that practiced smile she wore like armor. But something in her eyes made my stomach twist in a way that had nothing to do with my loss. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now," she said, brushing past me into the house, with a determination I'd never seen before. She set the casserole on the counter, but instead of sitting with me, instead of offering comfort or sharing memories of Robert, she began moving through the house with an unusual intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. I followed her, confused, as she walked from room to room, her fingers trailing along walls, her eyes calculating something I couldn't understand. In the living room, she studied Robert's collection of antique clocks, picking each one up, turning it over to check for maker's marks. She opened the china cabinet, examining my grandmother's serving platters with the focus of an appraiser. When she reached for the silver picture frames on the mantel, photographs of our family through the decades, she wasn't looking at the faces frozen in time. She was weighing them in her hands, checking the backs for hallmarks. My voice came out weak and confused when I asked what she was doing. "Just helping you organize, Mom," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, usually warm brown like chocolate, had turned cold and calculating, scanning our home like a spreadsheet. "You'll need to know what everything's worth for the estate." The word estate hit me like ice water. Robert wasn't even buried yet, and she was talking about estates. I wanted to tell her to stop, to leave, but grief had stolen my voice and replaced it with a hollow echo. The worst moment came when I found her in Robert's study. This was his sacred space, where he'd built his business, where he'd taught Michael everything about construction and contracts. The door was always closed now, preserving the smell of his cologne and coffee, keeping his presence alive just a little longer. But there was Jennifer, photographing his filing cabinets with her phone, pulling out drawers, examining documents. She had his leather appointment book open, running her finger down columns of numbers and dates. "Jennifer, please," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "I can't. Not yet. I'm not ready to go through his things." She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a flash of irritation quickly masked by concern. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I just thought. Michael's having such a hard time. You know how sensitive he is. I wanted to handle the difficult stuff so neither of you would have to." She closed the drawers, but I noticed she'd moved several folders, and Robert's spare key ring, the one he kept in his top drawer, was now sitting on the desk. She spent the next hour opening closets throughout the house, checking the basement, even climbing the pull-down ladder to the attic despite my protests that there was nothing up there but Christmas decorations and old tax returns. At each window she stood for a moment, looking out, measuring something with her eyes. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, she opened Robert's closet and started pushing aside his clothes, checking the walls behind them. When she found the small safe we kept behind his suits, her eyes lit up before she caught herself. "Just making sure everything's secure," she said when she saw me watching from the doorway, but her fingers had lingered on the safe's dial, and I saw her take a photo of the manufacturer's label. Something cold and uncomfortable settled in my stomach as I watched this woman I'd called daughter for 8 years map my home like a general, planning an invasion. That evening, after Jennifer left with promises to return tomorrow, to help more, I sat in Robert's leather armchair, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The house felt different somehow, violated by her calculating presence, but I pushed the feeling away with both hands. Grief, I told myself, makes everything feel wrong. The whole world was tilted off its axis because Robert was gone, and I was projecting my pain onto innocent actions. Jennifer was trying to help. She had to be. I wrapped myself in Robert's old flannel shirt, the one he wore for yard work that still smelled faintly of sawdust and his Old Spice aftershave, and tried to rationalize everything I'd seen. Jennifer had always been practical, almost to a fault. While other daughters-in-law might bring flowers or hold your hand while you cried, Jennifer showed love through action, through organizing and planning. When I'd had my gallbladder surgery 3 years ago, she hadn't sat by my bedside reading magazines like Patricia had. Instead, she'd reorganized my entire pantry and created a meal prep system. That was just her way. Michael had always been sensitive, even as a child. He was the boy who cried when we had to put down our old dog, who couldn't watch the news because the suffering of strangers kept him awake at night. His father's death must be destroying him. Of course, Jennifer would want to shield him from the painful administrative details. She was protecting her husband, my son, from additional hurt. Any good wife would do the same. The fact that she was asking about life insurance and bank accounts wasn't suspicious, I reasoned. Someone had to handle these practical matters, and I could barely remember to eat, let alone navigate financial paperwork. When she'd called that afternoon asking about Robert's pension details and whether we had any investment properties, I'd found myself apologizing for not having the information readily available. "Don't worry about it, Mom," she'd said, her voice honey-sweet through the phone. "I'll help you find everything when we're ready. We're family. We take care of each other." Family. The word echoed in my mind like a prayer, a lifeline I desperately needed to believe in. I thought about all the years Jennifer had been part of our lives. She'd married Michael 8 years ago in a beautiful ceremony in our backyard. I remembered helping her into her wedding dress, fixing her veil while she called me Mom for the first time, both of us crying and laughing as we tried not to smudge her makeup. She'd given us the twins, those beautiful boys who had Robert's stubborn chin and mischievous smile. How could I doubt someone who'd brought such joy into our lives? The next morning, when Jennifer arrived with Michael and began asking about the location of insurance policies and the deed to the house, I watched my son's face carefully. He seemed distant, uncomfortable, but that was grief, wasn't it? He'd always been close to his father, and losing him so suddenly must have shattered something inside him. When Jennifer mentioned that they wanted to ensure I was taken care of properly, Michael had nodded silently, reaching over to squeeze my hand. His touch was brief, almost reluctant, but I attributed it to his overwhelming sadness. I even defended Jennifer to my sister Margaret when she called from Florida. "Something's not right about that girl sniffing around your house like a bloodhound," Margaret had said bluntly. But I'd bristled at the suggestion. "She's helping me, Margaret. She's being a good daughter-in-law. Would you prefer she abandon me in my grief?" The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with skepticism. But Margaret had always been paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were coincidences. That night, as I lay in our empty bed, staring at Robert's pillow that I couldn't bring myself to move, I repeated the words like a mantra. Jennifer is family. She's helping. This is what families do. But even as I forced myself to believe it, a small voice in the back of my mind, one that sounded remarkably like Robert's, whispered that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The morning before Robert's memorial service, I woke at dawn with a crushing weight on my chest. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you hear your own heartbeat. I'd given Michael and Jennifer the guest room for the week, insisting they stay close during this difficult time, though Jennifer had seemed almost too eager to accept. I padded downstairs in my worn slippers, hoping to find solitude in my morning coffee before facing the day that would officially say goodbye to my husband. But as I passed the guest bedroom, I heard Jennifer's voice, sharp and clear through the door that hadn't quite latched. I don't know what made me stop. Perhaps it was the tone, so different from the syrupy sweetness she'd been coating her words with all week. My hand froze on the banister as her words cut through the morning stillness like shards of glass. "Listen, Derek, everything's going according to plan," she said. Derek? Who was Derek? The old woman doesn't suspect anything. She's so pathetic in her grief, she'd sign anything I put in front of her right now. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Old woman. Pathetic. The words echoed in my skull as I pressed my back against the wall, my legs suddenly unable to support me properly. "Michael's papers are ready," she continued, and I could hear her pacing, the guest room floorboards creaking under her feet. "He's weak, just like I told you. All those years of his daddy issues finally paying off. He'll do whatever I tell him to avoid conflict." There was a pause. presumably while this Derek person responded. Then Jennifer laughed, a sound so cold and cruel it made my stomach turn. The memorial's tomorrow. Once the will is read, we move forward with the transfer. I've already got the contractor coming next week to assess renovation costs. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Contractor? Renovation? Robert's body wasn't even in the ground yet. I heard her move closer to the door and I tried to step away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. 48 hours maximum, she said with satisfaction dripping from every word. After tomorrow, she'll be out. I've already put a deposit down at Sunset Manor. Told them she's showing signs of dementia. They have a bed available Monday. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the banister to keep from falling. She has nowhere else to go anyway, Jennifer continued, her voice taking on a practical tone as if discussing grocery shopping. Patricia lives in Seattle and hasn't visited in 2 years. The youngest son is dead. No siblings nearby, she's completely isolated, which makes this all so much easier. The house is worth at least $800,000 in this market, probably more once we renovate. The old fool's construction business sale put another $1 million in their accounts. Between the life insurance and the investments, we're looking at close to $2 million total. $2 million. The number bounced around my brain as I tried to process what I was hearing. Robert and I had lived frugally our entire lives, saving everything for our children, for our grandchildren's education, for the security of our family. And here was Jennifer, discussing it like lottery winnings she was about to claim. "Oh, Derek, you should see this place," she practically purred. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, sitting on 2 acres. Once we dump the old lady and get Michael out of the picture too, it'll be perfect for us. The boys? Please. They're going to boarding school. I'm not playing mommy anymore once I have the money. My heart shattered. Those precious boys, Mason and Marcus, who called me Grandma Sarah and still believed in Santa Claus. I heard her approaching the door and managed to slip into the bathroom, closing it silently behind me. I turned on the faucet to mask the sound of my ragged breathing, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the grief-stricken widow I'd been 5 minutes ago. Something had shifted in those pale blue eyes. The fog of denial had lifted, replaced by a clarity so sharp it could cut glass. Jennifer wasn't my daughter-in-law. She was a predator, and I was her prey. The memorial service was held at Riverside Funeral Home, the same place where we'd said goodbye to Timothy 28 years ago. I sat in the front row, my hands folded over Robert's favorite Bible, trying to focus on Pastor Williams' eulogy while Jennifer's morning phone call replayed in my mind like a broken record. She sat beside me, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief, her performance of grief so polished it deserved an Academy Award. Michael sat on our other side, his genuine tears falling silently as he stared at his father's casket, seemingly oblivious to the monster holding his hand. After the service, as guests filed past offering condolences, I watched Jennifer work the room like a practiced politician. She accepted sympathy with calculated grace, her hand occasionally touching her stomach in a gesture I'd seen her practice in the mirror that morning. Was she pretending to be pregnant for sympathy? The thought made me physically ill. She guided elderly relatives to chairs, brought tissues to crying friends, all while her eyes remained sharp and calculating, counting the house's value in every sympathetic embrace. Mr. Henderson, Robert's lawyer and friend for 30 years, appeared at my elbow during the reception. His usually cheerful face was drawn with concern as he gently pulled me aside, away from the clusters of mourners picking at finger sandwiches and sharing stories about Robert. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said quietly, guiding me to a small alcove near the coat room. "There's been an unusual development with Robert's will." My heart began racing as he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. An amendment was filed just 3 days before Robert's death. It leaves everything, the house, the investments, all assets, to Michael and Jennifer jointly. Not to Michael alone, but to both of them, with Jennifer as the primary executor. The room seemed to spin around me. "That's impossible," I whispered, gripping his arm to steady myself. Robert was in the hospital, unconscious. The doctors said he never woke up after the heart attack. Mr. Henderson's face was grim as he pulled out his phone, showing me a scanned document. The signature appears genuine, Sarah. It's witnessed by 2 people I don't recognize, and it was notarized by someone from Jennifer's office building. My eyes blurred as I stared at Robert's shaky signature, obviously signed under duress or while heavily medicated. But there's more, Henderson continued. The amendment specifically states that you're to receive a modest monthly allowance and can remain in the house for 30 days to arrange alternative accommodations. Alternative accommodations. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. 45 years in that house, and I was being given 30 days' notice like a problematic tenant. Can we fight it? I asked, my voice stronger than I felt. Henderson's expression was sympathetic but not encouraging. We can try, but it'll be expensive, time-consuming, and without concrete proof of coercion or forgery. Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of everything. Jennifer's voice behind me made my skin crawl. She'd approached silently, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder with the weight of a shackle. Mr. Henderson, thank you for handling this during such a difficult time. We appreciate your discretion. Her tone held a warning, and I saw Henderson's jaw tighten. Just doing my job, Mrs. Mitchell, he replied carefully, though I should mention there is another envelope from Robert with instructions to be opened tomorrow during the formal will reading. Jennifer's fingers dug slightly into my shoulder. Another envelope? What does it contain? Henderson's eyes met mine briefly before he answered. I don't know. Robert's instructions were very specific. It's to be opened only in the presence of the full family during the official reading. I felt Jennifer's tension radiating through her grip. Well, that's unusual, she said, her voice strained beneath its sweetness. But of course, we'll honor Robert's wishes. Won't we, Mom? I looked up at her face. This woman I'd welcomed into my family, who'd eaten at my table hundreds of times, who'd promised to love my son in sickness and in health. Behind her practiced concern, I saw the truth clearly now. She was already calculating how much she could get for Robert's antique tools, wondering if the memorial flowers could be returned for cash, planning which room would make the best home office. Yes, I said quietly, feeling something steel itself inside me. We'll honor Robert's wishes, all of them. That evening, after everyone had left and Jennifer and Michael had retired to the guest room, I sat in Robert's study with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, surrounded by papers that told a story of systematic betrayal. My hands shook as I pieced together the evidence like a detective solving a murder, except the victim was still breathing, barely. The conspiracy was so much larger than I'd imagined, reaching back months before Robert's death, possibly even years. The first thread I pulled came from our bank statements, which I'd finally had the courage to examine. 3 months ago, large transfers had begun appearing. $5,000 here, $7,500 there, all going to Mitchell Family Investments, LLC. I didn't know what that was, but Michael's name was on the authorization forms, his signature appearing next to electronic transfers I knew he couldn't have made without Jennifer's influence. Robert had been in and out of the hospital then, his first heart episode, and I'd been too distracted to watch our accounts. They'd counted on that distraction. I found an email on Robert's computer, sent from Jennifer's account to someone named Derek Patterson, the Derek from her phone call. As I read, my blood ran cold. It was dated 6 months ago. Patient is responding well to increased sodium in diet. Wife suspects nothing about the medication switches. Timeline remains on track. My God, the medication switches. I remembered Jennifer offering to pick up Robert's heart medication because the pharmacy was right by her office. She'd been so helpful, so thoughtful. Had she been slowly poisoning my husband? Diane, our neighbor and a retired nurse, had mentioned something odd at the memorial. She'd said, "It's strange, Sarah. Robert seemed so much better, then suddenly worse after Jennifer's visits. In my experience, heart patients don't fluctuate that dramatically without cause. I dismissed it as conspiracy theory, but now, staring at these emails, I wondered if Robert's death was more than just tragic timing. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying it became. Jennifer had been in contact with 3 different senior living facilities, not just Sunset Manor. Each one had received detailed medical reports about my declining mental state and dangerous forgetfulness. One report, supposedly from a Dr. Martinez I'd never heard of, claimed I'd been diagnosed with moderate dementia and required immediate full-time care. The deposit at Sunset Manor was for their memory care unit, essentially a locked ward where residents needed permission to leave. But the true scope hit me when I found a folder labeled Property Development hidden in Jennifer's laptop bag, which she'd carelessly left in the study. Inside were architectural plans for our house, but it wasn't our house anymore. They'd planned to demolish the back portion, add a second story, and convert our home into a luxury bed and breakfast. There were already investor agreements, provisional contracts with a construction company, Derek Patterson's construction company, I noted, with sick recognition. They'd scheduled the demolition to begin 2 weeks after the will reading. Michael's involvement became clearer through a series of text messages I found on an old tablet he'd left logged in. Jennifer had been threatening him for months, not with physical violence, but with something worse. Remember, I have the videos from Vegas. How would your mother feel knowing what you did? How would the church board react? My son was being blackmailed, though I couldn't imagine what he'd done that would give Jennifer such power over him. Other messages were more explicit. If you don't sign the papers, the boys will know exactly what kind of man their father is. The most chilling discovery came from our doorbell camera, which Robert had installed last year. I'd never learned to check it, but Robert had shown me once. Scrolling back through the footage, I found it. Jennifer meeting with Derek Patterson at our front door, while Robert and I were at his cardiology appointment. They'd been inside our home for 2 hours. The timestamp showed this was the day before Robert's final heart attack, the day before he was admitted to the hospital for the last time. I gathered every piece of evidence, my grief transforming into something harder, sharper. They hadn't just planned to steal our money and our home, they'd potentially murdered my husband, planned to lock me away, and were blackmailing my son. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was an orchestrated destruction of everything Robert and I had built. And tomorrow, at the will reading, they expected to make it all official. At 3 a.m, surrounded by evidence of Jennifer's betrayal spread across Robert's study like pieces of a shattered life. Something inside me finally snapped. The weight of everything, Robert's death, the conspiracy, my son's entanglement in this web of evil, crashed down on me all at once. I collapsed from his desk chair onto the floor, my knees hitting the hardwood with a painful thud I barely felt. The sobs that tore from my throat were primal, sounds I didn't know a human could make, 45 years of love and sacrifice crumbling into dust. I crawled to the corner of the study where Robert kept his old construction boots, the ones I'd begged him to throw away a dozen times. Now I clutched them to my chest like life preservers, inhaling the lingering scent of leather and sawdust while my body shook with grief, so violent it felt like it might tear me apart. Those boots had walked through job sites that built our life. They'd stood in hospital rooms during Timothy's treatments. They danced with me in this very room on our 40th anniversary when Robert had too much wine and pulled me close, humming our wedding song. The photographs on the wall seemed to mock me now. There was Michael at 5, grinning toothlessly as Robert taught him to hammer his first nail. I remembered staying up all night when he had pneumonia at age 7, bargaining with God to spare my baby boy. I'd sold my mother's wedding ring to pay for the specialist when regular doctors couldn't break his fever. That same boy whose forehead I'd kissed 10,000 times was now part of a plan to destroy me. Whether by choice or coercion, he was participating in my devastation. I dragged myself to the leather couch where Robert used to nap on Sunday afternoons. curling into a ball as memories assaulted me like physical blows. Jennifer's wedding day, when she'd cried in my arms before walking down the aisle, calling me the mother she'd always wanted. The day the twins were born, when she'd insisted I be in the delivery room, squeezing my hand and begging me to stay close. Every Sunday dinner where she'd praised my pot roast, every Christmas morning where we'd watch the boys tear open presents together, all of it, every single moment had been a performance, a long con designed to get to this moment. "Why, Robert," I whispered to the empty room, my voice raw and broken. "Why did you leave me alone to face this?" The unfairness of it all, that he got to die thinking his family loved him while I had to live with the truth, made me want to scream until my throat bled. I thought about Timothy, our sweet youngest boy, gone for so many years. At least he'd been spared this. At least he died knowing nothing but love, never having to learn that family could be your greatest enemy. I must have dozed off on the couch because I woke to find myself covered with a blanket, Michael sitting in Robert's desk chair, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe he'd come to confess, to apologize, to stand with his mother. But when he looked up, his eyes were empty, defeated. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, then walked out before I could respond. That was all. No explanation, no promise to make it right, just an apology that felt more like a goodbye. The sunrise coming through the study windows found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by 45 years of photographs I'd pulled from albums. My wedding day, young and hopeful in my mother's altered dress. Robert holding newborn Michael, tears streaming down his face. Patricia's first piano recital. Timothy blowing out birthday candles, chocolate frosting on his nose. Our entire life reduced to glossy rectangles, evidence of a happiness that now felt like fiction. I picked up our last anniversary photo, Robert's arms around me, both of us smiling, unaware that death and betrayal were waiting just around the corner. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen, hair wild, face swollen from crying, eyes red and hollow. This broken woman bore no resemblance to the Sarah who'd raised 3 children, who'd worked double shifts without complaint, who'd built a life on the foundation of family loyalty. That Sarah had died sometime during the night, collapsed under the weight of truth. But as I sat there in the ruins of my former life, something else began to stir in the ashes. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more useful. The will reading was in 6 hours and I had 1 card left to play. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 4 in the morning, its chimes echoing through the silent house like a call to arms. I sat up slowly from the floor of Robert's study, my joints protesting after hours of crumpled grieving. Something had shifted in those dark hours between midnight and dawn. The tears had dried on my cheeks, leaving salt trails like war paint. And when I caught my reflection in Robert's desktop monitor, I saw something in my eyes I hadn't seen before. Steel. I stood in the center of the study, surrounded by the debris of my investigation, and felt Robert's presence so strongly it took my breath away. Not the weak, medicated Robert of his final days, but my Robert, the man who'd built a construction empire from nothing, who'd faced down corrupt inspectors and union bosses, who'd taught me that the only way to lose was to stop fighting. I could almost hear his voice, that gravelly whisper he used when giving advice. "Sarah, honey, when someone tries to knock you down, you get up, and then you knock them down twice as hard." My hands had stopped shaking. That surprised me. After hours of uncontrollable trembling, they were suddenly steady as surgical instruments. I walked to Robert's desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about. Inside was a photo from our 5th anniversary, when we'd lost everything in a bad business deal. We were standing in front of our foreclosed first house, but we were smiling, holding hands, ready to start over. We'd survived that. We'd survived Timothy's death. We'd survived everything life had thrown at us. I'd be damned if I'd let Jennifer win now. I thought about those 40 years of emergency room nursing, the split-second decisions, the times I'd had to stay calm while chaos erupted around me. I'd saved lives with these hands, had fought death itself in trauma bays and cardiac units. I'd watched families torn apart by tragedy and had learned to recognize the predators who circled grieving relatives like vultures. Jennifer thought I was just a weak old woman, destroyed by grief, easy prey. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The Sarah who'd worked 36-hour shifts, who'd faced down violent patients twice her size, who delivered babies in parking lots and performed CPR until her arms gave out. That Sarah was still in here, and she was furious. Standing up straighter than I had in days, I walked to the window and watched the sun beginning to paint the horizon pink and gold. Robert had built this house with his own hands, laying every brick, hammering every nail. The garden I could see from here had been planted the spring after Timothy died, each rosebush a promise that beauty could grow from pain. This was more than property. It was our history, our sanctuary, our life's work. Jennifer wanted to demolish it, to erase us like we'd never existed, over my dead body, and I meant that literally if necessary. The decision crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. I would not run. I would not hide. I would not go quietly to some nursing home to be forgotten. I would fight with everything I had left, not just for myself, but for Robert's memory, for my son who was trapped in Jennifer's web, for those innocent boys who deserved to know their grandmother's love. If Jennifer wanted a war, she'd get one. But she'd made a critical mistake. She'd underestimated me, seeing only the grieving widow, not the woman who'd survived everything life could throw at her. I pulled my shoulders back, feeling my spine straighten vertebra by vertebra. The arthritis that had bent me forward seemed to release its grip as rage transformed into determination. I thought of Jennifer's smug voice on that phone call. The old woman doesn't suspect anything. Well, this old woman was about to teach her a lesson about underestimating your opponent. I had 6 hours until the will reading, Robert's mystery envelope waiting to be opened, and 45 years of intelligence, experience, and connections. Jennifer thought she'd already won. She was about to learn that the game had just begun, and I'd been playing chess while she thought we were playing checkers. I moved through the house with newfound purpose, my mind sharp as a scalpel as I assembled my strategy. First, I called Mr. Henderson at home, waking him at 4:45 a.m. "Tom, it's Sarah. I need you to listen carefully and not ask questions until I'm done." I laid out everything I'd discovered: the forged signatures, the medication tampering, the construction contracts, the elder abuse reports. His sharp intake of breath told me he believed every word. "Sarah, this is criminal. We need to involve the police." But I had a better idea. "Not yet, Tom. I want them to reveal themselves publicly. But I need you to do something for me." 20 minutes later, Henderson called back with confirmation. He'd contacted Judge Patterson, Robert's best friend from high school who now sat on the Connecticut Superior Court. Patterson owed Robert his life, literally. 15 years ago, Robert had pulled him from a collapsed scaffold at a construction site, breaking 3 ribs in the process, but saving Patterson from certain death. The judge was more than willing to attend the will reading as a family friend paying respects. What Jennifer wouldn't know was that he'd be there in an unofficial capacity, ready to witness any fraudulent claims or elder abuse firsthand. Next, I opened Robert's safe, the real one, not the decoy Jennifer had photographed. Hidden behind a false panel in the basement workshop, it contained everything Robert had wanted to protect. Inside, I found what I'd hoped for: the real will, dated just 1 month ago, properly notarized and witnessed by 2 nurses from Robert's cardiology unit. But more importantly, I found Robert's phone, the one Jennifer didn't know about, his work phone he'd kept for emergencies. My brilliant, paranoid husband had installed a recording app after becoming suspicious of Jennifer's sudden interest in our finances. With trembling fingers, I scrolled through the recordings. There it was, Jennifer's voice, clear as day, talking to Michael 3 weeks before Robert's death. "Once your father's gone, we move fast. Your mother's too trusting, too broken. She'll sign anything. If she resists, we implement Plan B, the dementia diagnosis. I've got Dr. Martinez ready to testify she's been showing signs for months." Michael's weak protest was barely audible. Then Jennifer's threat. "You want the boys to know about Vegas? About the debts? About what you did to that girl? No? Then shut up and do what I tell you." I carefully uploaded every recording to 3 different cloud services, emailed copies to Henderson, and even mailed a USB drive to my sister Margaret in Florida with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. Then I did something Jennifer would never expect. I called the contractor, Derek Patterson. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Mr. Patterson, this is Sarah Mitchell, Robert's widow. I understand you have some renovation plans for my house. I'd like to discuss them at the will reading today. Bring your contracts and your receipts for any deposits Jennifer might have given you. If you don't show up, my lawyer will be contacting the authorities about conspiracy to commit fraud." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, "She said you were senile." I laughed, surprising myself with how bitter it sounded. "Mr. Patterson, I'm many things, but senile isn't one of them. You've been played. Come to the reading, tell the truth, and you might avoid prison. Your choice." He agreed immediately, the fear in his voice palpable. He was a small player who'd gotten in over his head, and he knew it. My final call was to Patricia in Seattle, my daughter who Jennifer had claimed hadn't visited in 2 years. "Patty, it's Mom. I need you on the next flight home. Bring Stephen and the kids." Patricia, God bless her, didn't hesitate. "Mom, is this about Jennifer? I never trusted that woman. We'll be on the 8 a.m. flight." Contrary to Jennifer's lies, Patricia had visited just 3 months ago, and we spoke every Sunday. Jennifer had simply never bothered to check. As the sun fully rose, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the investigators' evidence spread across the table. In 3 hours, Jennifer would walk into what she thought was her victory celebration. Instead, she'd be walking into an ambush orchestrated by the pathetic old woman she'd so thoroughly underestimated. By 10 a.m., our living room had transformed into something resembling a courtroom. I'd insisted the will reading be held at the house rather than Henderson's office, claiming I was too grief-stricken to leave home. Jennifer had agreed eagerly, probably imagining herself mentally redecorating as the will was read. What she didn't expect was the 47 people who began arriving at 9:30, each one invited personally by me through early morning phone calls that had left my voice hoarse, but my resolve strengthened. Robert's construction crew arrived first, 12 burly men who'd worked with him for decades, their faces grim as they filed in, wearing their best clothes. Then came our neighbors, the Johnsons and the Nguyens, who'd watched our children grow up. The church choir, still in their Sunday best from early service, arranged themselves along the back wall. Robert's poker buddies took seats near the front, their expressions unusually serious. Even Mrs. Chen from the corner grocery store was there, clutching tissues and patting my hand as she passed. Jennifer arrived at 9:45 in a new black designer suit that probably cost more than Robert's monthly medication. Her confidence faltered for just a moment when she saw the crowd, her perfectly made-up eyes widening before she recovered her composure. "Mom, what's all this?" she asked, her voice pitched just a bit too high. "Robert was beloved," I replied simply, watching her jaw tighten. These people wanted to be here when his final wishes were revealed. You don't mind, do you, dear? Michael followed her in, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. When he saw the crowd, particularly Judge Patterson sitting in Robert's favorite armchair, the color drained from his face. He knew Patterson, knew his reputation as the harshest judge in Connecticut for fraud cases. His eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the war playing out behind them. Fear, shame, and something that might have been relief. He took a seat as far from Jennifer as possible, which didn't go unnoticed by her sharp gaze. The twins bounded in next, running straight to me with the innocent joy that only 8-year-olds could maintain in such circumstances. "Grandma Sarah!" Mason shouted, throwing his arms around my waist. "Mom says we might be moving into your house." I smoothed his hair, my heart breaking for these boys who had no idea their world was about to shatter. "We'll see, sweetheart," I murmured, catching Jennifer's ice-cold stare over his head. At 9:55, Derek Patterson slipped in through the front door, looking like a man walking to his execution. Jennifer's face went white when she saw him, then flushed red with rage. She stood to intercept him, but Judge Patterson coincidentally chose that moment to stand and stretch, blocking her path. Derek took a seat near the door, clutching a manila folder, his hands visibly shaking. The surprise arrival was Patricia, my daughter, who walked in at 9:58 with her husband Stephen and their 3 teenagers. Jennifer's mouth actually fell open. "Patricia, I thought you were in Seattle." Patricia's smile was razor sharp as she kissed my cheek. "I was. Mom called this morning about Dad's will reading. Funny, Jennifer, you told everyone I hadn't visited in 2 years, but I was just here for Thanksgiving. Remember? You complained about my sweet potato casserole." Mr. Henderson arrived precisely at 10 a.m., carrying his briefcase and something more, a court reporter who set up her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Given the substantial estate and the number of beneficiaries," Henderson explained smoothly, "I thought it best to have an official record." Jennifer's lawyer brain was clearly screaming that something was wrong, but she was trapped. Any protest would look suspicious to the assembled crowd. As Henderson prepared his documents, the room fell silent except for the clicking of the court reporter's keys and the sound of Jennifer's manicured nails tapping frantically on her phone. She was texting furiously, probably trying to reach the mysterious Dr. Martinez or her other co-conspirators. But it was too late. The pieces were all in place, the audience assembled, and the show was about to begin. I sat in my usual chair, the one where I'd knitted blankets for the twins, and waited for the walls of Jennifer's carefully constructed plan to come crashing down around her. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses with deliberate slowness. "Thank you all for coming to hear the last will and testament of Robert James Mitchell." He began reading the false will, the one Jennifer had orchestrated. "To my son, Michael, and his wife, Jennifer, I leave all earthly possessions, including the family home, all investment accounts, and the proceeds from the sale of Mitchell Construction." Jennifer's face glowed with triumph, though she attempted to maintain a mask of sorrowful gratitude. Several people in the room gasped, looking at me with sympathy as Henderson continued describing my meager allowance and 30-day eviction notice. However, Henderson paused dramatically, there was a second envelope discovered in Mr. Mitchell's personal effects, with specific instructions to be opened only in the presence of the entire family. He produced the sealed envelope with a flourish that would have made any magician proud. Jennifer's triumph morphed into confusion, then concern. "That's highly irregular," she started, but Henderson cut her off. "Nevertheless, it is Mr. Mitchell's explicit wish." Inside the envelope were 3 items: the authentic will, Robert's secret phone, and a handwritten letter in Robert's distinctive scrawl. Henderson read aloud, "If you're reading this, it means someone has attempted to steal from my beloved Sarah." I became suspicious when Jennifer showed unusual interest in our finances during my first hospital stay. What follows is evidence of a conspiracy that breaks my heart, but must be exposed. Play the recording labeled June 15th. Henderson pressed play on Robert's phone. Jennifer's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "The old fool's medication swap is working perfectly. His heart rate's been erratic for weeks. Once he's gone, Sarah will be easy to manipulate. Grief makes people stupid." The room erupted. Mrs. Chen gasped in Mandarin. Robert's construction crew started rising from their seats, their faces murderous. but Henderson raised his hand for silence as the recording continued. "Michael knows too much," Jennifer's voice continued, "but I own him. Vegas was the best thing that ever happened to us. Who knew your precious son had such a gambling problem? 50,000 in debt to some very dangerous people, and guess who paid it off? He'll do whatever I say to keep Mommy from finding out her golden boy isn't so golden." I watched Michael crumble in his chair, his face in his hands. But the recording wasn't done. "Once we have the house, Derek and I can finally stop pretending. 3 years of acting like I give a damn about Michael or those brats has been exhausting. But $2 million makes it all worthwhile." The room exploded. But before anyone could act, Michael stood up, his face wet with tears, but his voice strong. "I have recordings too." He pulled out his own phone with shaking hands. "Jennifer threatened to lie about me molesting my own children if I didn't cooperate. She said she'd planted evidence, taken photos that could be misinterpreted. She said no one would believe me over a concerned mother." His voice broke. "The Vegas debt was real, but I'd already arranged to pay it back. She paid it off without my knowledge, then used it as leverage." Jennifer shot to her feet. "These are all fabrications, deep fakes. This old woman is senile, she's—" But Derek Patterson stood up, his folder trembling in his hands. "I have contracts here, signed by Jennifer, for renovation work to begin next Monday, dated 2 weeks before Mr. Mitchell's death. She paid me $30,000 as a deposit, said it was from her inheritance. I have the check right here." Judge Patterson finally stood, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Mrs. Jennifer Mitchell, I've heard enough to warrant immediate investigation. As a judge of the Superior Court, I'm recommending your immediate detention pending charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." He turned to the court reporter. "Did you get all of that?" She nodded, still typing. But the biggest shock came when Jennifer tried to run for the door, only to find 2 police officers Henderson had quietly called standing in the doorway. As they read her rights, she turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You stupid old bitch. You think you've won?" I stood up slowly, my voice steady and clear. "No, Jennifer. I think Robert won. He protected me even after death. And you? You lost everything the moment you decided our love was worth less than money." The room burst into applause as the officers led her away, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors for the last time. The weeks following Jennifer's arrest unfolded like a slow healing of a deep wound. She was denied bail after investigators discovered she'd been slowly poisoning Robert with digitalis, a heart medication that, in the wrong doses, mimicked heart failure. Dr. Martinez, her accomplice, turned out to be a disgraced physician who'd lost his license 5 years prior. Both faced attempted murder charges, along with fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The trial would be long, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jennifer was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 7. Michael and I spent countless hours in family therapy, slowly rebuilding our relationship brick by brick. The truth about Vegas emerged. He'd gone there for a friend's bachelor party and had been drugged, accumulating the massive debt during a blackout night he barely remembered. Jennifer had orchestrated the entire thing through contacts she had in the casino industry. The relief in Michael's eyes when he realized I didn't hate him, that I understood he'd been a victim too, was worth every tear we shed together in those sessions. The divorce proceedings were swift. Jennifer tried to claim custody of the twins from prison, but the evidence of her stating she wanted to ship them off to boarding school ended that quickly. Michael gained full custody, and more importantly, he became the father he'd always wanted to be without Jennifer's toxic influence. The boys were confused and hurt at first, but children are resilient. With therapy and love, they began to flourish. 3 months after Jennifer's arrest, we held a second memorial for Robert, a real one this time, without the shadow of conspiracy hanging over it. Patricia flew in from Seattle with her family, and we scattered some of Robert's ashes in the garden he'd built for me beneath the apple tree, where he'd proposed 46 years ago. Michael spoke about his father with the honesty that had been missing at the first service, admitting their complicated relationship, but emphasizing the love that had always existed beneath the friction. I used Robert's life insurance not for myself, but to establish the Robert Mitchell Foundation for Elder Protection, offering legal assistance to seniors facing family fraud and abuse. The first case we took was Mrs. Eleanor Vance, an 82-year-old widow whose nephew was trying to force her into selling her home. We won. The look on her face when she hugged me in the courthouse reminded me that my pain had purpose. 6 months later, I finally took that trip to Italy that Robert and I had planned. But I didn't go alone. Michael and the boys came with me, along with Patricia and her family. We rented a villa in Tuscany, and one evening, as the sun set over the vineyards, I opened the small urn I'd carried across the ocean. With my grandchildren's small hands helping me, we released Robert's ashes into the wind, watching them dance across the Italian countryside he'd dreamed of seeing. "Grandma," Marcus asked, his 8-year-old wisdom shining through, "do you think Grandpa knows the bad people are gone now?" I pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo. "I think Grandpa knew exactly how this would end, sweetheart. He made sure we'd be safe." Mason added quietly, "I miss him." "Me too," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "But he's still with us, in this house he built, in the garden that blooms every spring, in the way your daddy is learning to use his tools." The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite Robert's absence. Michael had moved back in, temporarily, though we both knew it wasn't permanent. He was learning to stand on his own feet, to be the man Robert had always believed he could be without Jennifer's shadow looming over him. The boys filled the rooms with laughter again, their artwork covering the refrigerator where Jennifer's renovation plans had once been magnetized. 1 year after that terrible memorial service, I stood in my kitchen making cinnamon rolls, the twins helping me roll the dough while Michael read the sports section aloud, unconsciously mimicking his father's morning ritual. The house was ours, the family was healing, and somewhere, I knew Robert was smiling. Standing in my garden today, 2 years after that nightmarish memorial service, I watch Mason and Marcus playing in the same treehouse Robert built with his weathered hands. They're 10 now, taller and more confident, their laughter no longer carrying the shadow of their mother's betrayal. Michael is pushing them on the rope swing, his smile genuine in a way it never was when Jennifer controlled his every move. The afternoon sun filters through the apple tree's leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that dance across the grass, Robert once meticulously maintained. Patricia visits monthly now, having transferred to her company's Boston office to be closer. She's taken over the foundation's administrative duties, turning what started as a support group into a nationwide network that's helped over 300 elderly victims of family fraud. We've testified before Congress about elder abuse, and Sarah's Law, legislation making family financial exploitation a federal crime, passed last month. Robert would have been so proud, though he would have grumbled about having a law named after me instead of him. The house has witnessed a remarkable transformation, not the demolition Jennifer planned, but a restoration of its soul. Michael repaired the back deck using Robert's tools, each hammer strike a conversation with his father's ghost. The twins' artwork has evolved from confused scribbles about why Mommy went away to vibrant paintings of family dinners and fishing trips with their dad. We added a memorial bench in the garden with Robert's favorite quote, "Build with your hands, love with your heart, protect with your life." I've learned that betrayal, even from those we trust most, doesn't have to destroy us. It can reveal strength we didn't know existed, forge bonds that are stronger for having been tested, and teach us that family isn't defined by blood or marriage certificates, but by loyalty, respect, and genuine love. Jennifer tried to steal our legacy, but instead she inadvertently created a stronger one, a family that faced evil and chose love, that confronted deception and chose truth. The moral of this story is profound yet simple. The greatest inheritance we can leave our children isn't money or property, but the courage to stand against injustice and the wisdom to protect what truly matters. Robert knew this. Even as his heart was failing, possibly hastened by Jennifer's poison, he was building a fortress of evidence to protect me. Love isn't just about the good times, it's about safeguarding those we cherish even beyond our last breath. But this story carries another crucial lesson about the vulnerability of our elderly. Every day, countless seniors face financial exploitation from the very people they should be able to trust most, their own families. They're isolated, manipulated, and discarded by predators who see them not as parents or grandparents who sacrificed everything, but as obstacles to inheritance. We must protect our vulnerable elderly population with the same fierce devotion they once used to protect us. So I ask you, dear viewer, what would you have done in my position? Would you have fought back against someone who held all the cards, who had your own son under their thumb, who was prepared to lock you away? Or would you have surrendered to preserve a false peace? Have you checked on your elderly neighbors lately? Have you had honest conversations with your aging parents about protecting their assets from potential exploitation? If you've experienced family betrayal or elder abuse, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Your courage might save someone else from suffering in silence. If you know an elderly person who seems isolated or whose family dynamics suddenly changed, reach out. Sometimes a concerned neighbor or friend is the only lifeline they have. Remember this: Jennifer thought she was targeting a weak, grieving widow. Instead, she encountered a woman who'd spent 45 years building resilience, supported by a community that refused to let injustice win. Evil flourishes in darkness and isolation, but it withers when exposed to the light of truth and the warmth of genuine community support. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe if you believe in protecting our elderly from predators, even when those predators share their last name. Together, we can ensure that the golden years our seniors deserve aren't stolen by those who mistake kindness for weakness and see love as nothing more than a line item in an inheritance spreadsheet.